Okay, just a second. Yeah, so we discussed the concepts, theories, various types of migration, diaspora. We just had some basic understanding what diaspora and migration is. And we understood that not every migration flow, not every migration group can lead to the formation of diaspora. And we also, if you remember, we also discussed that settling down roots somewhere and creating homes across nation states and beyond nation states is what the definition, or not the definition, but the basic concept of diaspora is. I will not go to the transnationalism and globalization part, though in this class also to some extent we will deal with that. And saying this with the just a second. Yeah, saying this, so let's see what the objectives of our class this time will be. Generally, during this 1 hour, I will just try with you to discuss, and if you have any questions in between, you are welcome. I mean, it's not always comfortable or convenient to just have a monologue. If you have anything to say, you can just intervene and say. So the objectives that we'll go to discuss will be like on various approaches of understanding diaspora, on various perspectives, and on factors that influence those approaches and perspectives of understanding of what diaspora is, the concept, the definition, or the idea of diaspora is. As you remember, we also discussed during the previous classes that diaspora, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it's off. Okay, it's fine. During the previous classes, we discussed that there is no single or uniform definition of diaspora. That's why when I brought these objectives that we are going to discuss various approaches, we should remember, we should keep in mind that there are different approaches. There is not only one approach or single approach, but there are various approaches on how we understand diaspora. And it depends basically on the context, on various global events, on historical events, on how we formulate the idea of diaspora. And now, when we go forward, you will see that basically we'll try to understand the entire concept of diaspora on the time, space, and changing realities. So diaspora, as I already said, it's changing over time, considering many factors. And nowadays, of course, the importance of virtual interaction and the IT technologies has also to be considered while discussing diasporas. And also various new ways of transportation, connection. They also affect on the human experience, how they contact each other, how they form their communities across geographical barriers. And of course, participation in cultural, political, economic activities without geographical barriers, it also has some effect on the formation of diasporas and also on the understanding theoretical formation of the definition of diaspora. So now let's just discuss on the approaches, how we understand diaspora. As I said, there are approaches. There are also like theories, various theories. But as for the approaches, we differentiate the following. The first one is the class perspective. Then we have an ethnic and religious perspective, linguistic and subnational perspective, nationalist perspective. Maybe the words themselves, these words themselves, they already like denote on how we will be understanding or approaching diasporas. But basically, in the diaspora is diverse in terms of the historical experience, identity, language, nationality, economy, and also various identities. And we can just go on and on how many approaches they can be and how many perspectives can affect the approaches on understanding diasporas. But the class perspective itself, it's very like you can itself understand that within the same diaspora and within various communities, diasporic communities worldwide, there can be like class-based organizations, and they are in many cases or often they can also have like conflicting interests regarding their home country politics, regarding their host country politics. It's various, so they can even have not only political clashes of political interest, but also economic, and that can be various. And there are varieties of classes within the broad communities and their composition, and also the destination country, as well as I mentioned the home country. But it also comes to the resources and the transnational experience or engagement that these diasporas can have. But like in the of course, after the abolition of slavery, the European colonial rulers have created global movement of people from one colony to another to sustain their plantation economy, building infrastructure, and most of them come from poor and downtrodden and worked as labor in their colonies. And in this case, I would specifically like to mention the Indian diaspora, the case of the Indian diaspora and the class in Indian diaspora, like based on this, let's see, like the Indian diaspora, for example, in the Silicon Valley and the Indian diaspora in the Gulf countries, they have a completely different nature when we talk about the class. I mean, the perspective of from the perspective of class on understanding of how the diaspora is. Let's see now, like in the diaspora in the Silicon Valley is mostly the upper middle class, uh, which means that they are more privileged, they have more access to transnational resources, economic, political, social, than the labor migrants to the Gulf countries. Similarly, the social composition of this diaspora changes, as most of the labor migrants to the Gulf are single migrants, and they often migrate without their spouses. But in the case of the Silicon Valley, they like as upper middle class professionals, they have more family access and like more family life. And like for example, let's see, this one of the studies that was done by the Ramakrishnan. She discussed I mean, you can refer to her one of her works on the Indian diasporas and based on their gender, class. This is a good resource that you can use and to refer to understand the differences of the Indian diaspora based on, like I said, gender, class, and the understanding of how the Indian diaspora is formed outside the home country and how these different classes are interacting or whether they are interacting or not. But one interesting thing that we have in the theoretical or the research scholarly literature, there is also in regard to this class diaspora class approach, like we have another thing which is called like the new and old diasporas. For example, in the Armenian case, we of course, this is to an extent related to the class approach, wherein the new diasporas, the old diasporas, sorry, they are very critical to the new diaspora, and they basically don't interact with each other, because the nature of the formation of the old diaspora in the host country and the nature of the new diasporas that migrated in the recent years is completely different. That's why they don't try, like, there is some differences, some difference between them, and which is also related to the class, because the former ones were completely different formations, social formations. The new ones are completely different. Like, for example, I mentioned the Silicon Valley. They are mostly like upper middle class diaspora formation, while the new ones are labor organizations, and there is also sometimes caste-based organizations in among Indian diasporas, like the Telugu Association of North America, which is one of the oldest Indo-American organizations across Indian diaspora. But coming from the other to the other type of or approach on the diasporas is the ethnic and religious approach. It's again very simple. Diasporas, in this case, they are identified with their religion and ethnicity. But one limitation in this approach is that nation state is the focus here. And the transnational level of engagement, of communication, the transnational experience of diaspora communities is taken secondary in this case. And the cultural identity of in this approach is very limited. Like in the work of Stuart Hall, Cultural Identity and Diaspora, you can again refer to this if you later want to dive into the differences of these various approaches. Migrant groups, within the migrant group, the cultural identity, we should keep in mind that it plays a big role while creating their identity as a diaspora community. And Stuart Hall, in this regard, he says that cultural identity is a production which is never complete, that it is always in process, and it is always constituted within representation. He also argues that there are two ways looking at cultural identity. The first one is the shared culture, which is collective, of course, and people with the same ancestry hold within identity based on ethnicity is not a rigid one. And the other, based on this, we can also distinguish the other approach, of course. Linguistic, let me see. The linguistic and the subnational approach. Again, this is very simple. It means that we are linking or referring to our home country. Like we are trying to preserve the linkages with our home country based on our linguistic characteristics. And you can see the examples like the Telugu diaspora, Gujarati diaspora, Tamil diaspora. And you can also notice that this is beyond it is not focusing on the nation state as such. It's not taking, we'll go to the next one when I talk, we are not taking our historical or community historical memory as the basis of our linguistic linkages. I mean, this is going beyond that also. Within the same, you can see that within the same nation, there can be also various linkages with the home country, which is of course based on the language as well. And the best example is the Indian diaspora. I mean, various Indian diasporas that can be also identify themselves as diaspora community based on their linguistic linkages, let's say. And of course, finally, the last one is the nationalist approach, wherein we consider the formation of diaspora based on their history and the culture, of course, the shared history. And if you remember, on the very first class, we discussed Benedict Anderson's long distance nationalism. This is basically related to the nationalist approach, of course, but it is also in the contemporary times, we can also relate to this from the perspective of digital technologies as well, because like they within this approach also we can further like focus on our national sentiments from social media, and it often works as a mobilizing platform for diasporas that spread worldwide to connect within the with the nation, with the nation, beyond the nation. Let's formulate it this way. And this nationalist approach, it has been one of the oldest approaches to engage diasporas. And the classic case is, of course, the Jewish diaspora, the Armenian, and the later on the African diaspora also came to this. But the main, the classic ways of this, when we talk about the nationalist approach, is the Jewish diaspora and the Armenian diaspora. And there are, of course, when we are talking about these approaches, there are factors that impact or influence on how these approaches, and later on when we come to the theoretical approaches, the theories are formed or discussed. And the factors are mainly like we can differentiate mainly within these factors, like the social media. Of course, you understand that the social media is basically the information technologies, the political economy, global events, and primarily after the 9/11, this was the one of the prominent global events that affected or influenced the approaches. When we are talking about this social media approach, this one of the analysis by Kepos, which was done in 2021, this they published like data, and there are about 4.40 billion from which like 57 of global population uses social media, and Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, they are the leading three social media among all social media. And interestingly, the average amount of time per day is 2 hours 24 minutes. And diaspora communities all over the world, they are networking today through this social media more than they did before. And we can find various forms of interactions among communities of diasporic communities that originate from the same mother country or home countries, forming social media platforms and also sharing their common interests through this, of course, as I mentioned, through this social media. The political economy is very interesting. When we are talking about the political economy, it's basically about the economic capital or the economic power that can a member or a community or a diasporic community have, which can later on transform to a political power. Like and specifically the rise of Asian countries as new power, it has changed their diaspora relation. And the rise of nationalist movements also. And this further like brought to the politicization of the diasporas worldwide. And the next one is the global events, like I mentioned, and specifically after the 9/11, which played a big role in the perception of diaspora communities in different host countries, and this also resulted in the xenophobic attacks or on different minority groups and minority like diaspora communities in their host countries. Uh, and specifically, many South Asians were targeted from time to time. Now, I hope this all was clear, and I was also clear. Now, let's go to the theoretical approach. Let me see. Yeah, the theoretical approach. Basically, when we talk about the theoretical approach, of course, the first one was the a classic understanding of how diaspora was formed, how diaspora could be defined, and it was the victimized diaspora, which is the understanding put forward by a Jewish scholar Cohen. And this is the classic formation when the diasporas are created or formed due to forceful migration. And the other one, the inclusive approach, it is like including all international migrants and refugees. So basically, this is like the not simple, but the generalized understanding, theoretical understanding that diasporas are deterritorialized communities. But in the case of the victim diaspora, the formation, as I said, is due to forced migration, the violence and the pain. And in this case, the diaspora uh, is considering the homeland as a lost homeland. And they always want to return back to their homeland. There is this longing of returning back to the homeland, and therefore their belonging to the homeland can also be like identified, or it can have various identifications also, yeah. And the process of their uh, cultural inclusion in the host country and the cultural belonging towards their home country can be different. And when we are talking about the victimized diaspora, one thing I would like also to mention that in this case, the global events, like I mentioned initially, like the global events or the global forces, evolution of nation states, uh, they are basically not taken account within the dynamics of the diaspora formation. In this case, the diasporas or the diaspora communities are more or less like static formations. But when we are talking about the inclusive approach, in this case, there are various understandings or theoretical understandings and of definitions on diasporas or of diasporas by various scholars. And if I'm not mistaken, I brought this understanding by William Safran, if I'm not mistaken, as far as I remember, on the first class I brought this. And we should, when we are talking about this not generalized, inclusive understanding of diaspora, the scholars, they bring forward many characteristic features or identification points on how diasporas should be understood. Like the prominent one is by William Safran. Of course, not every definition is like a final one, or it's not like the one exemplary one to look on, because diaspora is not, like I mentioned in the case of victimized diaspora, is not a static phenomena. It's completely in process. It's dynamically evolving and developing the idea and also the experience based on the experiences of diaspora communities in various host countries, and based on their relation towards their home country, based on their linkages, belongings, etc. The understanding of diaspora is, of course, changing over time. And based on that, theories of diasporas are also improving and evolving. But the prominent one, like I said, by William Safran, he understood diaspora based on based on these following characteristics. The one is the memory, of course, the community, the memory that the community has, the shared memory, the myths about the original homeland. The next one, like as you can see, sometimes these communities, they may not be accepted by their host community. And of course, like I mentioned previously, they always want to be back to their homeland. They see their homeland as the point of their final return. That's why they are not, that may be the reason that sometimes they are not accepted by their host community. They also participate in the restoration, maintenance of their homeland, and the consciousness also, the solidarity of the group is defined by the relationship with its homeland. As we go forward, let's discuss other scholars who brought other perspective on understanding of how diaspora is, like Stephen Vertovich. He understood or identified diaspora within these three general meanings: the social form, the consciousness, and the cultural production. The cultural production, I would like to focus on this basically. Like, you can understand that the consciousness is, of course, related to their the common memory, common myths of being conscious of where they belong to, and being conscious how they are going to be integrated. This is related basically to that. Cultural production is linked to the process of globalization, and within this, globalization is seen as the process where flow of cultural objects, images, meanings, they result in the process of like forming, or of the forming of diaspora community. So all these affect on the cultural production, affects on the dynamic formation of the diaspora within time and space. And another one of the eminent scholars, diaspora scholars, Tololian, he also, his definition of diaspora is more or less more inclusive, I would say, because he calls diasporas like those communities that disperse, who develop varieties of association that endure at least into their third generation. And of course, he was one of the scholars, diaspora scholars, who considered diaspora as transnational formations, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and he was like, you can see dispersion was no longer viewed as merely a preliminary stage of the disappearance of distinct social formations and collective identities, but rather as a first step to their acceptable persistence in the form of consolidated diaspora. He was bringing basically the distinction between dispersion and diasporas. Like, dispersion is the process which can or may result in the formation of diasporas or may not. But after all, that dispersion is the first step. Without dispersion, there can be no further formation of diasporas, of course. Now, summing up all this, we should understand that diasporas, they are heterogeneous. They are not homogeneous groups because they have various diasporas. They have their own historical experiences. Of course, it depends on the location also, on the time also, the space, location. Everything is counted when we are talking about the theoretical approach and the factors on how they are affecting or influencing. Everything should be counted. And therefore, there is no homogeneous diaspora group, or there is no homogeneous understanding also about diasporas. Of course, you may see that their experiences, meaning of ethnicity, race, these may also be various across various diaspora communities. And yes, like you can see that, I mean, whatever we discussed, it's here that we should not consider diasporas as homogeneous, and we should focus on the various experiences of diasporas while forming the understanding or identifying on what diaspora is. There should be various approaches, theoretical approaches, like you saw. So there are various theoretical approaches also, and yeah, the relationship with their home countries and the host countries is also very different across various diasporas. Like you saw, even within Indian diaspora, the approaches are different based on their class, based on the language, linguistic linkages, and yeah, that's it. I think if you have any questions or you want to discuss something, you are welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah,
Uh, just a point. We see a lot of changes taking place in the way we look at diaspora. These
yeah.
diasporas are presently used as pressure groups, also sometimes by one country against the parent country, building political pressure. Sometimes they also have generated their own movements, as we see lot of such things taking place in the world, where
Mhm.
diaspora of one country is used as a pressure group against the parent, country of origin. Isn't it right now taking place, especially in the countries in the Western Europe and including in US?
Is it what? Sorry, I couldn't hear the last. Is it what?
When these diaspora communities are used by the host country,
Yeah, that I heard. The last your question I didn't understand. Is it what?
yeah, there is, say, Canada, India example.
Yeah.
There are so many other examples we can quote, where one community, one host country, it is happening. I think every now and then. Sometimes it comes in media, at other times it doesn't. But sometimes they bring in friction also between the host country and the parent country.
When we are talking about diaspora, I mean, we should differentiate when we are talking, it's basically on the theories. But what you are talking is the other part of diaspora, which is like the political thing, which is also like in some cases diasporas, of course, they have different understanding of what their homeland is, what their home is. Some diasporas have different identification with, like I mentioned, with their home country and their host country. There are also instances when diasporas are lobbying. That is different case. Diaspora lobbying is completely a different subject. But there are also like nowadays nation states, they also play a big role when we talk about the also IT technologies, development of IT technologies. That's also playing a big role in the linkages or the relation between the nation state and the diaspora communities. But what you are talking is basically like it's about the uh, perhaps I'm not well versed in this subject, but it is maybe the relationship between not only the diaspora and the home country, but it is also the relationship between two nation states. I am not well versed, as I said, in these subjects. I have to look into that and to understand what this diaspora community, how it is reflected in the host country and the home country. This is a big, like overall, it's a big theme or a big subject to look into, where different conflicting ideas come forward, different political and social, economic things, they are like mingled all together. I need to look into that and to understand basically about this thing regarding the
They also
Indian community.
influence elections. They
Yeah,
are also used in influencing
yeah,
elections.
of course. There are communities that have their own like. These are the communities that have strong link with their home country, and they themselves want to be not. They are not only used in many cases, but they themselves want to have to transform their economic power into the political power. Like they have an economic capital, and they are using that economic capital for the political. For the political purposes to get political power in their home country. But of course, in many cases, the diaspora, in the Armenian case also, in many, that's the general uh, like experience, not general, but in many cases it is like that. That is one of the characteristics of any diaspora that are used not only for political, but you can see when the Jewish diaspora was being uh, in the case of the Jewish diaspora, it was not only political, but that was also military to an extent. That was the political military diaspora, which was having this, as I talk, the national understanding or the national approach, theoretical approach. You can look, there are many like literature sources on this, that on the initial stages of its formation as a classic diaspora, the nationalist approach, the Jewish diaspora was also having this political military assistance to their home country. That was the initial stage of the state formation, and that had a long distance nationalism characteristic. It's not only political. Diasporas can have, mm, they can have various linkages to their home countries. But on the other hand, they can also conflict in interest with their home countries, because these diasporas, the way they are identifying themselves with their home country, it may be different. Some diasporas, they can have, like I mentioned, they can have uh, they can identify themselves not with the nation state, with the boundaries of the state as such, but they can just pick up one cultural element of their country. Some diasporas can also be like, they can also not they may not identify themselves at all with their nation state. That is another mm, form of how they are identified. So you are right, they can be different things. It depends also on the political, historical, mm, certain period, or the global event. Not only the global event, it can also depend on the political changes within the home country. So anything matters for the on how diasporas want to identify themselves, and on how the nation state also relates itself, and of course the host country also. Why not only hello yeah not only the
Yeah.
home country, but the host country also may use, let's say, may utilize resources of the diaspora community in the in that destination country. So it's very complex.
Yes, that was my point actually. That the
Yeah.
host country can use diaspora for influencing their parent country politics.
Yeah, of course, it may often happen. Why not? It is.
Hmm.
It's the dynamics of diaspora formation, and it's the dynamics of the um, a two nation state relationship also. Things are changing now. I mean, uh, it's not just a two-sided, in many cases, it's not just two-sided relationships, but if the diaspora has a big resource, if the diaspora has political influence, why not? It is also used for
Hmm.
the political purposes, not for the local purpose, not for any local purpose, not just for the philanthropy, like we will talk about it later, but also for bigger purposes also. And they are a good resource for to many countries, to many communities.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Anyone? You may also just give your own opinion if you want to. I mean, it's not just like question answer. If you don't agree with something, or if you agree with something, you can also give your own opinion, or just we can discuss. I mean, it's not just question and answer. If you wish to, of course.
If no questions are there, then we can meet next week for the next classes.
Yeah,
Let us know
okay.
tomorrow.
You may later on also, if you come across to something interesting, some diaspora experience which is of worth looking at, you can also share with me. You can contact me. You can discuss anything with me. I mean, you are all welcome.
I think Bashir has something to ask. Bashir,
I think he was the one
Uh,
who can. Yeah,
I,
talk.
I just made a point what I thought about it, and I'm happy that it has been elucidated by ma'am. So if there is anything more, we can discuss subsequently.
Yeah, sure. Okay then.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you all.